Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this pre-inquiry meeting. My name is Philip Stadden. I'm the inspector that's been appointed by the Minister to conduct this inquiry into the waterfront proposals. Some very brief housekeeping issues just before we get underway. I've not been advised of any fire tests, so if you do hear the bell, just exit via the signed route. It's pretty much the way you came in. There are WC facilities in the lobby area just through those doors. I don't actually intend to take a break in this meeting, but if you do need the facilities, just feel free to come and go as you wish. It's set for a maximum of 2 hours. It's a relatively concise meeting. So we'll crack on in a moment. I will shortly say a little bit more about the pre-inquiry meeting before we rattle through the agenda that I've set out. But before I do that, we're going to take some introductions. We'll start with the applicants team. We're getting a bit of feedback on the sound.
Yeah, I'm just trying to hear. Turn it off, don't we?
Okay, we'll start with the applicants team. We'll then start with what I term the planning authority. I appreciate they have different names over here, but I think the planning authority is a term we'll all recognise. And then I'll ask for introductions from anybody else who's likely to speak this morning. We don't need to go around the entire room, but if you know you're going to say something this morning, it'd be useful to have your name in advance. I think there is an attendance list in circulation, and it'd be useful if you could add your name to that. So if I turn to the applicants team, would you like to introduce yourselves, please?
Good morning, Lee Henry. I'm the CEO at Jersey Development Company, the applicant.
Good morning, I'm John Nicholson of MS Planning, supporting JDC with the application.
Okay, and if we go to the planning authority, please.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Johnston, Senior Planner, Case Officer for the application.
Hello, good morning. Chris Jones, Senior Planner, assisting Wendy Johnson.
Thank you. And if I go around the room, first of all, is there anybody here who is likely to speak on any of the agenda items? Mr. Young.
John Young, I think people probably know I used to be the previous planning minister, but to be clear, this application came in during my watch, but I was quite clear it needed to go on to the future minister, and thereby I had no role whatsoever in the setting up the inquiry. So I'm here as a member of the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And is anybody else who knows they're going to speak this morning? No, that's fine. Okay. Right. Well, let me just say. I nearly forgot. Let's go around the virtual attendees. We've got quite a few of those. I was saying before we started this meeting, I've done virtual meetings, I've done physical meetings. Mixing and match is really quite tricky. It is a bit of a juggling act. One of the introductions I think I'd like to start with is, could we go to Helen Wilson, who is the Programme Officer for the inquiry. And morning, Helen, could you formally introduce yourself? I think you're on mute.
No.
You're not now.
Good morning, I'm Helen Wilson, the Programme Officer for the inquiry. I work under the direction of the inspector. I'm totally independent, and my role is to make sure that you have all the documentation you need. You come to the inquiry when you are called, and there's an inquiry website which I think the inspector is going to mention later on.
Thank you, Helen. We'll say a little bit more about your role further down the agenda. Okay. If we go back to the online introductions. I'm not sure which order we'll do this. Do you, to the applicant, do you have members of your team attending?
I do so, yes.
Do you want to run through them? Because there's just a series of names to me at the moment.
We can get somehow the full schedule of who's attending. On the screen now we've got Patrick Conn, Gillespie's. He is part of our core team. We've also, I'm afraid I can't see all the names of who's there. We've also got a selection of our technical specialists from Waterman, and I think we've got some of our team members from WSP. Who's controlling the big screen so we can? Can't see the names because they've got it on Amazon.
I mean, there's.
Yeah, I think Alistair Coates is the only member from the Government of Jersey's team who's on that list. The rest are our technical specialists who will be identified on the schedule, I think is with you already, in relation to their particular disciplines and the submissions that are intended to come before the
Okay,
inquiry.
Mr. Nicholson, do you feel the need to introduce them all, or are they just sitting there in?
They are interested observers today. I think Patrick's the member of the core team who you will be seeing most of at the hearing itself.
Okay, well, should we let Patrick introduce himself? You're on the screen.
I'm Patrick Conn. I'm an associate at Gillespie's Landscape Architects. We're lead consultants for the applicant team. We'll be representing the inquiry in matters of landscape and urban design.
Thank you. And it was Mr. Coates, was it, from the Planning Authority side?
Yeah, in terms of online, Alistair Coates is a policy, but there are... Morning, Alistair.
Hello there. Yeah, I'm in the place and spatial planning team in the what's called the Cabinet Office now. We're the team who produced the Island Plan and also produced the Southwest St Helier planning framework. So I'm here to answer any policy-related questions if required.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Coates.
Morning.
Good. Okay. On the list of virtual attendees, how do I do this? Is there any? I want to ask a question. Is there anybody that would like to introduce themselves? I'm thinking of people. Were there people there outside the applicant and the Planning Authority's team? Were there names you didn't recognise, Mr. Nicholson?
No, not as
No.
far as I can see. I don't know if the Planning Authority.
I would just mention, in terms of online, no, there's nobody I can see from the Planning Authority team, but there are present in the audience government consultees who I haven't introduced. I don't know if you'd like me to, but I can do.
Your judgment call there.
Sure, okay. So we have representation from the Natural Environment team, solid waste, pollution control, highways. Oh, yeah, and highways are also up there as well. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of, sorry, historic environment team and also housing and regeneration team.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, if we're okay with introductions, I'm sorry it's a little bit messy with the different formats we've got, but hopefully everybody can hear us loud and clear. I'll just say a little bit about the pre-inquiry meeting. I'll be honest, you don't generally get this sort of level of attendance at a pre-inquiry meeting. They tend to be rather dull affairs, more akin to a few people in a cupboard in a council office in England. And that said, although they're fairly dull and procedural in nature, they are incredibly important in terms of setting the foundations for what I hope will be a very open, successful inquiry, which will open on the 15th of May. At the moment, if you can imagine my position. I've been given instruction from the Minister to conduct this inquiry. My office is full of an absolute stack of complicated documents. I've got a whole load of statements of case. I've got an incredibly long list of potential witnesses from the main parties. By the main parties, I'm referring to the applicant and the planning authority. There's a couple of hundred plus letters of representation. There's a whole host of consultee responses. Some consultees haven't yet responded. And you can imagine all of that. If we were to open the inquiry the middle of next month without any preparation, it would be something of a muddle. I think many of you will be aware that I have conducted some major inquiries in Jersey before, and we have gone through this process of having a pre-inquiry meeting, and it is very much an exercise in taking stock of where we are in the run-up to the inquiry and making sure that we structure the inquiry so that everybody gets to an opportunity to contribute. And by that, I mean, I appreciate there will be lots of different views about this development, but I want, at the end of the inquiry, I want the applicant to be content that they've had every opportunity to make their case, to draw out the key points from the evidence that they've submitted. I want the planning authority and all the regulatory functions to feel likewise that they have had the opportunity to state their case to me, any concerns they have about the application. And equally, with all of the interested parties, I want to make sure that they feel that the inquiry has been open to them and that they can contribute their views to it. Now, to do all that, it needs some structure, and that's the purpose of the pre-inquiry meeting. I did circulate a short note with an agenda a couple of weeks back. I think it was the 14th of March. It's only a one-pager, but it really just sets out what this meeting is. It is absolutely not about starting to make the case. It's not about looking at the evidence, or there are no points to be scored here. But it is very much around a taking stock of the application and starting to think about how we are going to programme the inquiry to achieve the objectives that I've just set out. So, without further ado, I'm going to start rattling through the agenda that I circulated. And although it looks like quite a long list there, the key element, if you skip down 2/3 of the page to under item 3, item J, that's where I really want to focus. And this is about the inquiry main issues and the format of the sessions. Now, we're not going to actually define the answers to that today, but the exploration of who's likely to attend and who's going to give evidence, that will enable myself and Helen to sit down, take stock and work out a draft programme. And when we come up with a draft programme, that will remain flexible for a little while. So we'll take away what we hear today and we'll try and put that into some sort of structure, and we will undergo some sort of consultation. We'll release that to the main parties and just see if they are comfortable with it, or if they think there's some gaps in it, and we can tweak and adjust it. So that's the idea of what we are seeking to do today. And under my item 2, I've just got a couple of, I just want to run through some sort of factual or fact checks around the planning application itself. Now, my understanding is that the planning application itself was submitted some time ago, but it's only relatively recently been the subject of a revised set of drawings, and then there has been a process of publicity and consultation as a result of that. And we now have a revised description and on my walkabout over the weekend, I've seen lots of site notices up bearing that revised description. So we're all clear on what the proposal is. I'll just read out the description just so there's no doubt whatsoever. It's described as outline application with all matters reserved, and we may come back to that later. So outline application with all matters reserved, demolish existing structures, phase construction of new development comprising up to 984 residential units with basement parking, up to 31,125 square metres of non-residential floor space comprising retail, commercial, social infrastructure, leisure, arts and cultural facilities, public and private open spaces, new pedestrian and vehicular access, other associated landscaping, infrastructure and highway alterations, including relocation of the Slipway and La Fregette Cafe, land reclamation and flood defence measures, and then it says the 3D model is available. So that is the description of the development that I have been asked to undertake the inquiry into. A little note on the 3D computer model, which is a great resource that you have in Jersey. Most places in England do not have such a facility. I've used it, I've looked at it with this application, and I would like it to be available for use in this room in the inquiry itself. I wouldn't have thought that's a problem because it's an online facility and we should be able to look at that. But I think when we think ahead to sessions that we will inevitably have on townscape and landscape issues, visual impacts, long distance views, it's quite a useful resource and we will be able to use that to have some discussions.
So if I may, it's also potentially applicant to have a physical model available.
Excellent.
Well, just been unfortunately let down by one supplier and short notice, I think it was 8:30 this morning, the alternative has been sourced.
That is really helpful because I was going to come on to, well, let me just finish on the 3D model. I did receive from the programme officer over the weekend, somebody was saying that they couldn't access it. The moment I got that, I checked and I was able to access it and it all worked fine. Is it temperamental?
Yeah, I also got the email from the particular person and they were saying the model was freezing, so they couldn't, so they could open the model, but which seems to suggest it might be an issue to do with their internet speed or so.
Right, okay.
So yes, the model is there and it is accessible, but it's yeah, I think it depends on somebody's computer.
Okay, Mr. Young, you wanted to.
If I may, I obviously don't have the access of working, the benefit of working on the state's network with all the super servers and all that. I'm using it, access it remotely from home using my laptop, which is a fairly well geared up internet connection, but I found it very difficult. It does take, there are long lags and delays, and it does all sorts of strange things, you know, because there's a long delay between giving your instruction and the thing responding. You've then kind of given up and gone on to the next thing, and so it really is, I found it quite difficult. I don't know what the solution is. That it's obviously using very heavy computer resources because this is a big application, a big scheme. I don't know, but I do flag up that I think ordinary members of the public like me might not find it as reliable. It's good news that we're going to have a physical model, which I hope is to scale, and I hope it's set up at a level that people can view it to see what the proper eye lines are. But anyway, I'll make those comments.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just related to that, I did notice there was another representation from a member of the public that was making a comment on the plans and saying basically they're pretty hard work to work your way through. And I think if there are physical model resources and the 3D model, that will assist. I mean, I would just make that comment. And when I held the hospital pre-inquiry meeting last year, I made a similar point to the applicants there that, you know, I've spent the best part of 40 years poring over plans and planning applications, and I sort of understand them, and I know how to navigate around them, but I'm always very conscious of you know, people that may have a really genuine interest in this development, and if it's the first planning application you look at, boy, you're going to get a headache very quickly trying to navigate around the plans and some enormous documents, design and access statement and the design codes, and just the nature of the way they're stored on the planning register system. Because they're so big, they're broken into all of these parts, and it's not the easiest thing to work your way through. So I would just encourage any resource that could be made available, then that would be useful. I've been aware that there have been some public consultation exercises, and I haven't delved into the material that was used in those, but it may well be that there is existing material that...
We're both about to try and help you on this.
Right, okay.
If I might just go back to the 3D model, I think the issues are that the model that we view, the public view, is internet-based, so it's going to be constrained by the download speeds, etc. But the planning department have a standalone laptop, high specification, and can run the model direct, hardwired, rather than going through the 3D model section on the portal. And I don't know if that can be made available in a similar manner that it does for planning committee.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's also worth noting that the 3D model can be viewed at customer and local services as well on a computer system there. But in terms of the 3D model, I think there would be one other point to note, which was that in the interest of full disclosure, the applicant provided a revised 3D model at the time of making its revised submission. That did not get uploaded correctly to the government's portal, so there was a period of time in which the previous model was available on the government planning website. That was highlighted to us, and we rectified the problem. It was to do with a technical error, that even though the technical assistants were uploading the correct model, for some reason the government's computer system was drawing from the old version of the model. So there was a period of time where even though it was advertised as having a new model, the model that was shown on the government system was not the correct one.
Right.
So it is correct now.
It's correct now.
Yes, but just to make people aware, that wasn't the applicant's fault. That was a government system, a problem there. And just in terms of the documentation, I would say there is also a hard copy of everything in the library, in the St Helier library.
In terms of Mr. Nicholson's point about the hardwired system, so the special laptop, could we have that resource at the inquiry?
So absolutely, yes, sorry,
Because,
yes.
And somebody that's able to drive it, in the sense that if we're in a session and we're talking about townscape impacts and views from, we want to be able to say, show me the view from Fort Regent, toggle the building on and off so we can see that and have that discussion. That would be really useful.
Yes, absolutely, we will, yes. Sorry.
Just had one other follow-up. The hard copy, I believe we will have a hard copy in the room for the inquiry library. I think we've provided 4 sets of everything. 3. So the library copy, will that be available in?
Yes, sorry, we can pick that up from the library and bring that along for the inquiry. Yes,
Okay.
that will be there.
The other resource is there is a consultation website, as you pointed out, where the full submission is available.
Yes.
From the South West St Helier consultation site, and it's just presented in its component parts, and it's a little bit easier to navigate than the gov.je site, which is probably a little bit complex for large applications when the public try and view them. So we've been directing people, and it's a mirror of the information.
Yes, yes. I did notice that, and it was a bit easier to use than the register. But yes, okay. Okay. Well, moving swiftly on, item 2C, consultee responses and any outstanding responses. Now, I noticed late last week that I think, Mr. Johnson, the Planning Authority's statement of case has got a very useful table in it, which is all of the bodies that have been consulted on the planning application. I was actually going to ask for that, and then I found it, which was really useful. A couple of thoughts from me. First of all, I just wonder whether you could separate that out and issue it to Helen as an inquiry document, dated sort of roundabout now. The second thing is that when I breezed through that document, there were quite a number of what I would regard as quite important consultees that hadn't responded. And given that my job is to provide a comprehensive report to the Minister, there are, outstanding responses from Parks and Gardens, Jersey Water, Education, Jersey Police, Fire and Rescue, Ambulance Service, Disability and Inclusion Team, and there might be a few more. I'm sure they're all very busy, and there's all reasons for why they haven't responded, but I just think that it would be helpful if you could give them a bit of a nudge, and you can use me as bad cop there, just say that I've raised it this morning, that I would like to see their, if they've got no comments, well fine, but we're talking about a very major development, and what you don't want to have is, for example, just say that the Minister grants permission for it and it gets built, and then one of these bodies comes back later and said, oh, why didn't you do this in terms of emergency access or ambulance routes or whatever. So I would perhaps urge you to give a fairly strong nudge to get some responses there, and hopefully perhaps just before the inquiry we can have an updated table. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Noted, and I will do that.
Thank you.
And just actually in terms of consultation responses, now might be the appropriate time to mention that at the bottom of that list was reference to the Jersey Architectural Commission.
Yes.
Yes, so Friday of last week, the revised scheme was presented by the applicant to the Architectural Commission for their review and comments. So that has now been completed, and we're awaiting the notes of that meeting. They're aware of the timeframes that we're working to with the inquiry and have endeavoured to get those notes completed this week. So as soon as they are available, they will be published as part of the inquiry documents and provided to you.
Yes, I mean, I've some experience with this body. It tends to not... It tends to sit on the fence a little bit, doesn't it? In that it doesn't recommend yay or nay. They tend to be notes of its considerations, but there are earlier JAC notes, I think, from previous meetings, aren't there? Which okay. So if I've got that right, so there's been a recent meeting. The notes will be issued, and we can add those to our inquiry documents list. Yeah.
Correct, yes.
But they don't intend to, if I could just clarify, that they're not a body that would take an active role in the inquiry itself.
No, there's no intention for that.
Okay. My next item, again, Mr. Johnson, if I could, please could I have a short note just confirming that all of the procedural requirements relating to publicity and consultation have been undertaken. I don't want much, just a one-pager in terms of what was done when. It may already exist, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I can provide that, yes.
Okay. Our next item on the application itself is concerning interested parties' comments on the application. And there are, when I last looked at over 200 comments, a lot of them concern the cinema and swimming pool issue. I just make the point here, and I've had it on other major schemes, that whilst with the inquiry we have quite a discipline around deadlines and timescales for statements of case and proofs of evidence, sitting times and all the rest of it. Because of the nature of the inquiry system in Jersey, we're dealing with a live application. So stuff keeps on happening and people will continue to make comments on the application. It may well be that the bulk of them are received now, but they do tend to sort of carry on. I mean, my view on this is, although it can be a little bit messy and it would be lovely to have a clear deadline, but if somebody makes a submission in the coming weeks or in the run-up to the inquiry, I'm going to consider it along with those 200 and whatever others. I certainly did that at the last inquiry. I would just urge everyone, if you've got views, will state them as early as you can. Okay, let's just go on then to item 3 and talk about the inquiry itself. Firstly, terms of reference and scope of the inquiry. It's set out very clearly in the one-page letter that I received from the Minister. It's a letter dated 25th of January. You can see the letter on the inquiry website. There's a few sort of procedural and timetable issues, but my task is the consideration of the planning application under the policies of the Bridging Island Plan. It's short and sweet. It's that is the job of work for me, and I'm asked to report by 30th of June. So that's what it is. When I just make that point at this meeting because it's important that everybody understands that the Bridging Island Plan is the policy document that I'm going to be making that assessment against. It's inevitable that what's contained within the Bridging Island Plan may not meet with everybody's endorsement, and I watched the examination sessions where different views were held, but this inquiry is not going to be about reopening any policy issues. The policies are adopted and the assessment will be against those adopted policies. My next item concerns the programme officer. Can we get Helen back up on the screen? Hello, Helen.
Hello.
I just want to say a little bit about Helen's role. Helen and I have worked together on a number of major inquiries in Jersey, and she's very much the first point of contact for the inquiry, and I would urge you to make any inquiries and any documents you submit should go through Helen. I can't underestimate the importance of the role Helen carries out. It is very much a Cinderella role. You'll see her at the inquiry, sat at the back there, and but what she actually does is, well, I couldn't do these sorts of inquiries without her assistance. She makes sure that all of the documents are in the right place, all the people are in the right place, and she carefully manages people's expectations in terms of what they can and can't do and say. And if you're playing an active role in the inquiry, you will get to see and meet Helen along the way. I would stress the point around using Helen as the point of contact. I do have another life and I do run a business in the UK. And as a result of that, I've got a website and people can find my contact details. And sure enough, they have done on previous occasions, and they've tried to email me directly. They've tried to phone me directly. Well, sorry, but I'm not going to engage, because there is a discipline around the inquiry process. So everything must go through Helen, or it is not going to be considered. So please, I'm sure you can all respect that. The next item. Oh, Helen, is there anything you want to say? Any pleas or requests?
No, I don't think so. I would like to say something about the website once you've introduced it.
Good. Okay, well, yes, we'll move seamlessly on to that then. Inquiry website. There is a gov.je website for the inquiry. You'll find all of the basics on there, everything you will need to know. There's the dates of the inquiry, details of this meeting, the terms of reference letter that I referred to, document lists. There's a list of the statements of case. There is Helen's contact details, and we will try to keep that updated as we go along. Helen, what did you want to say about the website?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that that on the website there is a core documents list, and there it lists all the application documents, but the revised application documents are all together in order, and then the superseded documents are separated. So if people are struggling with the state's application website as well as the applicant's consultation website, there is also this core documents list, which I hope is more user-friendly. Thank you.
Have you been reading my notes? You've just read it. You just read out the next page of my notes.
Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. Yes, the inquiry documentation, there are some very, very good lists there that you will see. As Helen mentioned, there's the core documents list, and that's got all of the documents, plans, and environmental impact assessment. And they've all got hyperlinks, so you can go through the list. If I want to look at that document, you can click on it, and you will be there, subject to internet and everything else. So that's the core document list. And I asked Helen to separate out all of the superseded documents. So remember I mentioned earlier about the original application. All of those documents are still there on file, but I didn't want them getting in the way of the application that we are now considering as revised. So if you want to look at the older documents, they are there on a superseded documents list. And Helen mentioned the inquiry documents list, and you'll find on there statements of case, consultation responses, various comments on the application, and we will be putting the proofs of evidence on that inquiry documents list, again with the hyperlinks, so you can get to them as you wish. Okay. Moving on to item E, which is statements of case. Really, I was just recording here. I've received 13 statements of case. 9 of those are from states bodies, either the applicant as a states-owned development company, the planning authority, or consultees and regulatory services. There are 4 from others. I think Save Jersey's Heritage is one body that will be attending the inquiry, and I think the remainder are from individuals. And then I mentioned earlier, I've got over 200 reps mainly from members of the public. I'd just like to now move to the main parties and talk about the likely numbers of proofs of evidence. And for people unfamiliar with these terms, statement of cases tends to be fairly brief. It's this is what I think, this is what I'm likely to say at the forthcoming inquiry. A proof of evidence is a much more detailed document, and they're often produced by experts in particular fields, might be transport, highways, planning, and they will be often quite weighty documents, and if they are big documents, they have to have a summary with them at the front. Now, from soundings that Helen took, the list of potential proofs of evidence from the planning authority and the applicant looks like quite a long one. Could I just turn to the planning authority first, and could you just run me through who's likely to submit a proof? I think I've got a list actually that, I'm not sure if you produced it, that Helen sent me through, and it's got 12 items on it.
Yeah. So shall I run through
Yes,
what
please.
I see at this stage? I will obviously do a proof of evidence on planning matters. There will also be a proof from... Do you want to know what the proofs are likely to cover as well at this stage?
Yes,
okay.
please.
Next on my list is Tracy Ingle, Historic Environment Team,
Yeah,
which will likely cover issues including historic environment, townscape visual impact, design and landscaping.
yeah,
Sorry, do you want me to run through what mine will cover? I didn't actually. Mine will be land use planning and policy, amenity, visual impact, design, open space provision, as well as general considerations about the application as submitted.
so the overarching planning
Yes.
assessment. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Natasha Day, Head of Strategic Housing and Regeneration.
Yeah,
And that would be in terms of housing need, mix, tenure, and affordable housing.
yeah,
Infrastructure and Environment Solid Waste Team. And that would be in terms of waste arisings and disposal.
yeah,
Infrastructure, Environment, Pollution Control.
yeah,
We have an independent consultant who is looking at ground conditions and hydrogeology. So that's,
this is
yes.
the one that we've got a request for an extension to the deadline.
Correct.
Yes.
Do you want me to address that now?
No,
Okay,
carry on with
yeah.
the list and we'll come back to that. And
Yes.
remind me if I forget.
Okay. Jody Robert. He is Natural Environment, Water and Air. And Infrastructure and Environment Coastal Assets Team, Stephen Fitzgibbon. So they're all around the topic of ground conditions, hydrogeology, land reclamation works, flood defence measures.
Okay.
Transport, movement, parking provision.
Yeah,
Infrastructure and Environment, the Operations and Transport Team.
yeah,
Inland Flood Risk and Drainage. Infrastructure and Environment, Liquid Waste. Andy Downey.
okay,
Ecology and Green Infrastructure. Mark Woodall, Land Resource Management. air quality, noise, construction and demolition impacts. That's infrastructure and environment, the environmental health team, and also the coastal assets team. Sustainability, climate change, renewable energy. Lisette Jones from SPPP, Strategic Policy Planning, and another P, Performance, Placemaking, I don't remember. Cabinet Office.
Okay, so that's quite a lot. Okay, well, I'll go through the same process with the applicants team, and then I want to have a little bit of a discussion around understanding what are going to be the big issues, because it may be that some of those experts are able to reach agreement with some of the applicants' experts, and as a result, we may not need to spend lots of inquiry time on them. But that is your long list of a dozen or so potential, well, proofs for sure, and potential witnesses attending. Okay. Mr. Nicholson, I think I have a long list.
Looks like it's only a little coloured spreadsheet. The far right-hand column is the intended proof of evidence for each of the kind of named technical specialists, and we made a stab at the penultimate column, one from the end, about who will be attending in person, who will be attending online, and that will give an indication in our mind of the likely key topics. Bearing in mind the hearing is scheduled for a week, we concur with your thoughts that it would be useful to have a kind of sieve through the intended submissions to work out what needs to be given due emphasis over the week.
Okay, so all of those names on the left-hand column are busy working on proofs, are they?
Not at the moment. Most of them are on the screen listening into this, but they
Okay.
certainly will be this afternoon.
Okay. Okay, well, we don't need to read them all out and go through them, but there are a lot there, which okay, and outside the planning authority and the applicant, the only proof that I know for sure, well, based on their statement of case, Save Jersey's Heritage have indicated that they will be submitting a proof. I've got a feeling that one individual may well submit, but I don't think there's going to be a huge number of others. So that very long list, and as Mr. Nicholson said, that term, a sift, is really quite important because, I mean, I'll be honest, if they were all to show up for the inquiry, 30 odd from the applicant side and a dozen or so from the planning authority side, plus a few more that may wish to speak from outside the main parties, well, I think we'd be 5 weeks rather than 5 days. It's just not going to fit. And it may well be that some of those disciplines and issues could be gathered together, but it perhaps leads me on to the next item, which is statements of common ground between the applicant and the planning authority, because that could be a really important part of that sifting process. So first question, are there statements of common ground either in preparation, or do you propose to prepare them? Either.
I don't think it's in preparation, but I'm certainly happy to kick that off. I fully understand and appreciate the benefit it can have for the hearing itself, and I'm completely open to shuttling a draft backwards and forwards with the planning authority. The only question I might have is the intended timeline for that, when you would want it produced. I don't know if the case officer has anything to add to that brief position.
No, I'd just add that we are also in agreement with working on a statement of common ground. I think we'd previously communicated we'd be open to the applicant having the initial stab at that, preparing the document, and then we will review. But yeah, we're happy.
Yeah, I think that preparing a statement of common ground for the whole application is quite ambitious. I just wonder whether you might want to consider breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. I mean, based on earlier experience of other major developments, it would, for example, be very useful to have a statement of common ground on transport-related matters. I think you could also do one. Well, you can define the subjects, but you know, they are likely to be the main issues that we're going to cover at the inquiry. But it may be more timely to separate them out. I mean, if the transport's a good example, because there's quite a few issues to consider: trip generation, parking issues, accesses, and sustainable modes, active travel, pedestrian connections to the town centre. And if there is a significant amount of agreement between the applicant's transport consultants and the state's regulatory functions on transport, well, it'd be good to capture that. Doesn't mean that everybody else has to agree with their stated common ground, but it would certainly assist me in being able to report to the Minister that these are the matters, the technical transport matters that are agreed, and then that then filters out the issues that may be disputed, and that's what the inquiry could spend a bit of time on. And I think you could go through the same exercise with lots of other subject matters. And in terms of Mr. Nicholson's question around timescales, well, sooner the better. And not just from my benefit, but in terms of understanding the areas of disagreement between the planning authority and the applicant. That the sooner you get there, the better it will be. And it can lead to then a much more focused inquiry debate. I've tried setting deadlines before on statements of common ground in Jersey, and well, let's just say they don't tend to happen. I'll make a wider comment here. I'm not sure statements of common ground in Jersey, I just think you struggle with them a little bit on both sides of the fence. They shouldn't be that difficult. If you can't agree it, leave it out. If you can agree it, put it in, and it will save a lot of time if you can actually capture what is not disputed, what isn't challenged.
I do think the idea of breaking it into topics might enable that to flow quite nicely. Yes,
I mean, I'll give you another example. For example, let's take, transport's quite a big one, but let's take heritage. The state's advisor, Ms. Ingle, and I forget your heritage expert's name, but they both made submissions. There's the reports, and there's probably a chunk of agreement, and there are issues of disagreement. Well, a a statement of common ground could actually set out what you agree on, and I don't really need to then probe that in any great depth. And then it will set out the issues where you are in disagreement. And that then enables me to sort of narrow down and focus, and we can have, when we have that heritage session, we can have that discussion. I'll leave it with you. I'll leave it with you. I say, I'm not going to set deadlines other than say to you that the sooner the better. Now, under this inquiry main issues topic, I'd welcome views from the planning authority and the applicant on the way we approach it in terms of likely topic sessions. Mr. Jones will be familiar with the big inquiry we held last year into the hospital, and we structured it around, well, summarising it, there's a beginning, an end, and a chunk in the middle. And the beginning bit almost designs itself. We have a tradition of short opening statements, and for the hospital inquiry, we had a bit of a factual presentation, which we may well do for this one. And then we went into topic-based evidence session through the week. We had a plenary session in the middle of the week, which was open to everybody to come along and ask a question, make a contribution. And then at the end of the week, we had the customary sessions on planning conditions, planning obligations, summings up, and then we all went home. Now, the beginning bit and the end bit, I'm very comfortable with. We know what's going to happen there. My concern at the moment is that the main chunk in the middle, there seems to be quite a lot of topics, quite a lot of witnesses, and at the moment, an absence of statements of common ground. And right now, I'm feeling uncomfortable about whether it all fits. My comfort might increase as we get closer to it, but right now, with that sort of field of potential witnesses and I have to say, not yet having completed my full document review and seen proofs of evidence, I'm probably a little bit uneasy, but at the moment it does feel like it could be quite a squeeze unless there is some movement on statements of common ground relatively quickly. Thoughts?
Optimistic we can make good progress on statements of common ground. Just in terms of where we are today, I think the statement of case from the case officer provides a good summary of core topics and matters which the planning authority think should be further explored. I think that represents a good starting point for the top.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I would add to that I think the difficulty that the planning authority has had to an extent is the volume of documents has made it challenging for me to get feedback from consultees. And as you've indicated, you're still going through the documents, and I'm finding that with a lot of consultees as well, that they have, some are still in the process of formulating their thoughts or completing their reviews. So it's been difficult to get a full grasp of the depth or breadth of concerns that they may have. So that has presented a challenge. So yeah, there is quite a range of topics here. And And hopefully we can reach agreement on some aspects through a statement of common ground.
Good. I'm just breezing through your list in. Yeah. Yes, yes. So, well, I can take away from this, Mr. Nicholson, that you are comfortable with using that as a starting point.
Correct.
Yeah.
We've had rolling engagement with technical specialists throughout the application evolution, the pre-application and EIA process as well. And the team have offered briefing sessions to consultees, conscious of the weight of information which is in the application and the fact that they have a day job to carry on with at the same time. And if we can be of any further assistance in terms of providing focused information to a particular specialist, then we're happy to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
When will we, obviously, both the planning authority and the applicant are very familiar with that list, given the scope of the very big, significant breadth of this inquiry and the depth of substance, and in view of the remark, we're kind of aiming at I can understand professionals aiming at a moving target. When will the public see that list so we know what the actual contentious content that we're going to be allowed to discuss? And I've put that question, but I think it's important the public do see it at the earliest opportunity. Obviously, we don't have it now, we don't have sight of that list, but obviously it's relevant, I think it's relevant to the position I put in my representation about policy issues, so I think it's really quite important to get that clear at the earliest possible point. Because, if there's any doubt about that, it does suggest to me that is the timing of the inquiry the right one? Is there a scope for postponing it until there is such times and we've got clarity on that? I put that as for you to decide, but it just occurs to me that if we're dealing with a huge chunk of work and it's a moving target, and we're about a month away from the inquiry, that question, take it clearly.
Okay. I'm not sure any inquiry would take place if we waited that. But yeah, well, I think the planning authority's position is you can see that in their statement of case. They flagged the issues that they either have some concerns with or they say require some further exploration, and that's clearly what the inquiry will do. In terms of the programme, well, Helen and I will try to work to produce a draft as soon as we can. I mean, clearly, that's not going to be until at least we've had sight of the proofs of evidence, but we will try and get that organised as soon as possible. And what we will definitely include is in the inquiry week. I think it's on the Thursday evening. We've booked this room to run into the evening, and we will have an open session there for members of the public to come along and state any views. So I think, yeah, I hear what you say, Mr. Young.
You covered it, thank you.
Okay. I actually breezed over a bit in the agenda around cross-examination. I take it you don't want to turn out with lawyers and cross-examine?
I think we've already confirmed our position, both ourselves and the planning authority, the lawyer-free zone.
I'm so pleased. I have nothing against lawyers. I'm actually married to one, but from an inquiry perspective, I think the way we've conducted earlier inquiries is the best. It's the most inquisitorial, and I think we get to the answers more effectively.
Sorry, could I just, when we were running through proofs of evidence, we mentioned the request for the extension.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to, I don't want to lose sight of it, that was all.
Well, I just make 2 points on, well, first point is, yes, that's agreed, the week extension. The second point I make is it's agreed as an exception. I don't tend to like flexing that deadline, primarily because I've only got a limited period of time from that proof deadline to the inquiry to read everything. But I agree this one on the basis that I understand it's agreed by the applicant's team. And you never know, I mean, is that a matter actually where gaps may narrow, common ground may be found?
I believe so, potentially from the feedback that I received from our
Okay.
consultant, yes, that to get this extra time to review the additional hydrogeological assessment that had been submitted, he felt helped to fill in gaps in the information. So, yeah, I would hope so.
I think that was born about the particular specialist nature of that topic, and there not being a direct resource within government to respond to that. And in the interests of making sure that the Minister is properly appraised of the issues, I think it is right that that is given the time necessary.
Good. I mean, it's an interesting sort of topic area, and in terms of the task I have in terms of advising the Minister, because there was a document submitted by the applicant's team quite recently, and it was a fairly chunky technical report on hydrogeology, and it had an appendix which was like 1 million pages, which I didn't understand any of. But the challenge for me is I'm no expert in these matters, but I need to understand enough to be able to advise the Minister that either there is an issue or there's not an issue, or if there is an issue, can it be resolved? And I need to do that in relatively plain English. And I think for experts in that field, whether it's for the applicant or I think the consultant that you've taken on, they need to be able to sort of capture that in non-technical summaries for us to be able to, or for me to be able to report that through to the Minister.
I would just say I did actually communicate that in selecting a consultant. I was clear to make sure that they were somebody that was familiar with reviewing environmental impact statements, as well as obviously having their relevant technical expertise, but then being able to communicate in a way that we can understand as part of their reporting.
Good. Okay, well, just before we then leave this discussion around main issues, I was keen not to jump ahead until we'd had this meeting to think about what some of the sessions would be, but it feels now I've looked at the Planning Authority's statement of case and I've heard the consensus from the applicant that we definitely need a session that will cover design, townscape, visual impact, public art as a group. Would you agree? That was the first one that shouted out to me. Transport and accessibility has got to be another session. Trip generation, access, parking, active travel, links to the town centre. Heritage, for sure. Housing. Amenity, living conditions, noise, air quality, sunlight, daylight, all that kind of stuff. I also wrote down open space, landscape, natural environment, public realm. There is actually, there's a specific issue on leisure facilities with regard to the cinema and the pool and the re-provision. Now, I've seen well, it is a couple of hundred now, representation saying save our pool, save our cinema. And I've also seen press coverage from the applicant saying, seem to be indicating, well, there will be continuity of provision. Well, this is a sort of thing, it may well be somewhere in the documentation that I haven't seen, but if it could be, the applicant's position could be absolutely clarified on that, so we understand it, and whether that's a planning obligation agreement type issue, well, you might put a lot of people's minds at rest, and it may be that people then are content that they don't need to come along and make their case on that.
That work is in train, sir, and we've met some of the key parties who've raised those concerns, and it will be fully clarified in the proof, and we hope it's a constructive conclusion.
So at the moment, that detail that I just mapped out, that isn't in the application, but there's likely to be something that will come forward which makes that undertaking. Okay. Yeah, just on my sort of scribbled list of possible sessions, there's a definite session on contamination, hydrogeology, pollution, waste horizons, waste disposal. Would we agree? Sustainability, BREEAM and energy has got to be picked up somewhere. Flood risk and drainage, construction impacts, education, health and crime impacts. Now, I think it's probably best if you leave Helen and I to just sort of play around with what might fit together and a sensible running order. It would be useful if the main parties could indicate, and you don't need to do it now, you could do it to Helen after this meeting, if you've got key witnesses, for example, that one I mentioned on contamination waste, if you've got key witnesses that need to be available but have any availability constraints during the week, let us know and we'll do our best to make sure that we can work around those. So if you could just give a list to Helen of witnesses and any days or times that they would find difficult during that week. We've only got a limited amount of flexibility, but if we can make adjustments, we will do. And just to close on this item for now, are you happy with that evening session?
Slot that I've got something booked in that week, but it depends how long into the evening. I'm sure it can be facilitated. So yeah.
Okay.
I did have one point to air about the table that's in the proof from the case officer.
Yeah.
And we've got, I think there's 2 topics, and I just wondered how you intend to deal with these, or whether they are woven into other people's submissions. We have a kind of parallel process of consultation and feedback through the application itself, plus the public inquiry process. We've got 2 submissions from what were SPPP, which are planning policy submissions, and Alistair Coates was on the call earlier, but there's no direct statement of case from policy, and policy have not been listed as a witness. It's the kind of position of consultation feedback in the context of proof coming from a different person.
Yeah, if I can, the planning authority's view was that we would have Alistair available at the inquiry for any points of policy clarification, but that interpreting the policies in the Bridging Island Plan would fall to either the planning officer or whichever consultee was commenting, rather than the planning policy officer preparing a proof of evidence.
Yes, I mean, there are clearly some departmental issues here, which I can't claim to really understand the way government is structured, but what I refer to as the planning authority, I mean, you will be familiar with a planning authority in the English system, where the policy and development management functions, they may well sit as sort of separate sections, but a report that goes to a planning committee will be the product of their various inputs. And possibly a chief planner will decide on any big issues. But you've got this different setup here, haven't you, in Jersey, where you've got the regulatory function, and then the policy function kind of sits in the middle of government, doesn't it, somewhere? And sorry, I
think, bearing in mind that the response we just heard, I think it would be useful if the planning policy team were represented, with a small r, rather than formally in the room, and if their consultation feedback is material, then I'm content we can refer to it as necessary. If that makes sense to the development control team of the planning authority.
Could we get Mr. Coates back up on the screen? Hello, Mr. Coates. So,
Hello.
were you following that discussion then?
I was indeed, yeah, and we are the policy function is an entirely separate function from the regulatory function here. The chief planning officer, as such, has no authority or sway over the planning function, so we are discrete entities. And in terms of the policy consult that our section wrote, because this is an outline application with all matters reserved, we've kept the policy consult relatively comprehensive and robust, but it is a high-level response. So we do flag up in that areas of concern, areas of support for the proposal, and there's nothing at all I could think where I could expand upon that in a statement of case or proof of evidence. But I'm certainly happy to be in attendance at the meeting to clear up any policy-related issues.
That's helpful. We'll take that into account, and I'm sure it will be useful. But that would be a role around providing advice on how policy is interpreted.
Indeed, yeah, both the Bridging Island Plan and also the Southwest St Helier planning framework, and any associated SPGs. Okay.
Thank you. We'll have to have a think about which session or sessions you best fit in, but we will do that.
Yep, good.
Thank you.
Okay.
I did have one other point in a kind of similar way on the table in the consultees and stakeholders section. We've got a situation regarding parks and gardens, landscaping and public realm, which you identified as a topic.
Yeah.
The engagement that the applicant has had has been with the head of section, who has, in my understanding, now put in a personal representation and effectively recused himself from further involvement.
Righto.
It seems politely unconventional, but no doubt his prerogative.
Okay. I'm not sure what to say to that.
I think we will need to, in our proof of evidence, rely on the submissions and feedback made from that department, so that the individual is still able to speak to his personal submissions.
I don't know the detail. We won't name the individual, but is it that you're saying that in your discussions you were getting positive feedback and he's written in a personal capacity in a negative sense?
Correct. I think
Right.
we can name him because he's been named in the press. It was covered, but I think it is an oddity that we might all need to be aware of when we come to discuss landscaping and public realm matters.
Okay.
I think it's just worth mentioning from the planning authority's perspective, this obviously has presented a difficult position for us because we were relying upon him to provide technical input and expertise in terms of landscaping. We have not, within his team, we've not been able to identify anybody to act in an advisory role. But we will be bringing forward Tracy Ingle, the Historic Environment Officer, who has a background in urban design as well, to comment on aspects on landscaping. Tracy is also the Executive Officer for the Jersey Architectural Commission and has been involved with all 6 meetings that have taken place whereby the Commission has fed back on matters of landscaping and public realm. So whilst not the ideal situation to be in, we are able to provide somebody.
Okay.
I say that it's not unusual in Jersey, being a small community, professional people within government find themselves in that difficult situation. But as long as they recuse themselves, I think that should be fine and accepted. It's in the rules of government, but the obviously it's the planning authority to decide how they can cover that gap, albeit from other means, and it's for you, of course, to judge at the end of the day. So I think it's important not to interpret any criticality about somebody choosing to do that, because it happens pretty well at every major inquiry up in
Okay.
just make that
Yes.
balance.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, excuse me for butting in. Ian McKenna from Hollis. When some people are speaking in the room, it doesn't come over the audio, so we can't hear the people who are in the Teams meeting can't hear what people in the room are saying. Like that gentleman who just spoke, I certainly couldn't hear what he said.
Briefly, would you like me to do that?
He's
Yes,
going to
it was
repeat
John
it.
Young. What I was saying is that in my experience, having worked for the states in this area for a long time before my past ministerial role, it's not unusual for professional people working within government of Jersey to have to make individual decisions where there's a conflict. And as long as they, in my experience, it's happened pretty well at every major inquiry, and as long as they recuse themselves and are very, very clear that the views they're putting forward are personal ones, their problem obviously exists within government to how it covers that situation, albeit it must be open to government to get professional advice from elsewhere, contracting in or whatever you do to cover it. And obviously at the end of the day, it's up to Mr. Stadden, the inspector, to make a judgment. I hope that clears up for the record what I did say. Why saying that is I didn't want the discussion to be interpreted any way critical that anybody in a senior position makes that decision, which is a tough decision. And I think we should respect that. It's a small community in Jersey and conflicts are unavoidable.
Thank you. I hope you heard that. Okay. Right. Well, moving on then to some final issues. room layout, sitting times, resources, etc. I've used this room a few times for inquiries, and it's pretty good. It works really well. We can set up the room to suit different topics and sessions. If we've got a roundtable discussion that's going to cover quite a few issues, we'll have a different layout to one where we're perhaps having the submissions from one witness. We will probably have the main tables for the applicant and the planning authority. You might be a bit more around there rather than to the sides of me, just so I don't have to keep darting back and forth. We should have the screen. Mr. Johnson, can you tell me about what we will have in terms of technology and live streaming and the likes?
Yes, the event will be Teams enabled, so any expert witnesses that need to join via Teams can do so. Well, actually, it might be a different platform. There is a better platform than Teams. So we have Delta, who will be providing the function for that. They will test in advance with any witnesses that are joining remotely that the platform works for them. So it would be useful to know closer to the time those attendees that will be engaging remotely. The event will be live streamed on YouTube, and the link will be published on the inquiry website. And I can't think there's too much more.
Helpful.
Yeah.
And we talked earlier about resources like the digital model, the 3D model, so we'll be able to see that. There could also be particular sessions where we want to look at application documents. I'm thinking like the landscape and visual images, photo montage type evidence, and I assume that will be relatively straightforward to load up and be viewable.
Hopefully, yes, we will be prepared to have all the application documents available on the screen.
Okay, and in terms of sitting times, I think we'll start at 9:30 every day. I might come back to that actually if it's looking a bit congested. Traditionally, inquiries in England start at 10 o'clock in the morning, but I've always tried to sneak an extra half hour here. My brain works better in the morning. It may be that if it is looking quite congested, we might need to look at 9 o'clock start on some, if not all of the days. But for now, let's just default to 9:30. We'll take a mid-morning comfort break for 10 minutes or so at an appropriate time, and then we'll take an hour for lunch, or an hour-ish, depending on how things run, aiming for between 1 and 2 o'clock. Might be a little earlier, might be a little bit later, depending on if we're ending a particular session. And we will finish, we'll aim to finish most days at 5 p.m. Other than on the Thursday, which we will run into that evening session. And on the Thursday, I'll try and finish the daytime session a little earlier, so for the main participants, we'll get a little bit of a break before heading into that open plenary session.
Can I just mention, sorry, one point. The venue did say on the Wednesday we would need to be out by 4 p.m. That's the only day in the week that they have another commitment.
I wasn't aware of that, but I'm glad you said.
Yeah.
Adds a little bit more pressure. Okay. Next item, planning obligation agreement, heads of terms. In fact, let's round this up with the item after that, draft list of planning conditions. For those unfamiliar with planning inquiry proceedings, it is convention that we discuss planning conditions and planning obligations in an inquiry. It doesn't in any way indicate that permission is going to be granted. That will ultimately be a matter for the Minister. But it's a very important thing to do because it, again, can address some policy issues. It can narrow the gap between the applicant and the planning authority, reach agreement on matters. And having that list of draft planning conditions and heads of terms of planning obligations, they are there. So if the Minister decides that he wishes to grant outline permission, they're ready for his consideration, and they provide the controls for the permission. Now, again, a bit like with statements of common ground, it would be very helpful if these could be prepared and agreed as far as they can be before the inquiry sits. That will then make the condition session a lot more succinct within the inquiry. In fact, we might not even need to waste much time on it if you are able to reach a list which is pretty much agreed. If it's agreed bar for 2 or 3 conditions, we'll have that discussion on the 2 or 3 conditions that you don't agree on, and any others that may have emerged in the course of the week as suggested conditions. So again, I'm not going to give you a deadline, a timetable, other than to say it would be, I think, in everyone's interests if that could be produced ahead of the inquiry. And the more you can agree, the better it will be. Okay.
Yeah, we're in agreement with that.
Okay. Let me just talk briefly about site inspections. Do you know, I think this must be the most pre-visited site of any. I have lost count of the number of times I have wandered around it, and but obviously not in the context of this application. In the context of this application, I did my first walk around yesterday. I did what I call the red line walk around. I walked around the outside of the application area, and I walked through its main features. I'm happy within the inquiry week to walk around with representatives from the main parties if they wish. I mean, if there are particular issues that they wish to point out. I mean, most of it is very publicly accessible anyway, so happy to do that. Any thoughts on site inspections? Mr. Nicholson first.
That was exactly as I would anticipate it. The site is open to the public. I know that you know the island relatively well, and I'm sure the likely viewpoints, on-site issues will already be in your mind. Happy to accompany you if necessary. Also happy for you to take yourself around as you may want to.
Thank you.
Yeah, probably nothing to add to that. I'm not aware at this stage from any of government consultees that there are any specific aspects they would like to highlight to you via site visit. But if that does become known, then obviously we will share that information.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just. Okay, I'm into the roundup points now. Any other inquiry procedural matter? I did have one actually that was for Mr. Nicholson. I meant to raise it some time ago when we were talking about the application. I can't see an updated planning statement. The only one I've got is the original one. Is that the case?
That is the case, yes. We can deal with the relevant points in the proofs of evidence. The planning statement does include a review of the Bridging Island plan as it was at the time of submission, but that's correct.
So there isn't going to be a fresh planning statement. You're going to cover it in your proof. Is that what you're saying?
That was my intention, sir, but we can edit as necessary to synchronise with the rest of the package if that's what you would like us to do.
No, it's for you to decide what's in the application. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything. It was from, yeah, pre-Bridging Island Plan times. Okay, right. Well, that brings us to any other business and close. So, as I say, I mean, it is pre-inquiry meeting. It is a bit all over the place in terms of covering these issues, but it's a really important stage in the process to engage with the main parties, and just for Helen and I to start thinking now about how we're going to structure this into a workable programme for the week when we open on the 15th of May. But I'll just open it up to the applicant, the planning authority, and then others, just to see, is there anything I've missed? Is there anything I need to be aware of? Is there anything you need to tell me?
I'm comfortable the points we wanted to cover have all been dealt with and discussed. Thank you.
Ms. Dawson?
Likewise, I think we're comfortable. That's covered everything we would like it to. Thank you.
And anybody else? Mr. Young, wait for the mic.
Thank you, sir. John Young. Yes, obviously it's already looking a very, very crowded agenda for the inquiry. And, you know, I listed down when you spoke there, 11 subjects, if I missed that correctly, if I got that down correctly. You're in the Thursday night session, which is a kind of a sweeping up public comments section. And I take it from that the remaining sessions will be effectively just exchanges between the applicant and the planning authority and their witnesses, and the public won't be given the chance to raise any issues as we go through that long list of points, which there are many areas of public interest. I don't want to go into the detail, but I'm sure there will be.
All of the sessions will be open to the public, and the way I've conducted previous inquiries, I have obviously invited evidence from the applicant side, I've invited evidence from the planning authority side, and after those evidence exchanges, I will open it to anybody present if they wish to ask a question. I'll also, if people attend the inquiry and they want to speak, whether it's on the generality of the application or on a specific issue, I'll find time to allow that. So I try to be quite open and inclusive, because in terms of the task for me of preparing the report for the Minister, I do want to hear everybody's views.
Yes, well, thank you for clarifying that. I think there was a couple of points I'd just like to check here what the planning officer and the application. I'm a little bit concerned, to be honest, that the planning statement predates the Bridging Island Plan debate, because the Bridging Island Plan at the stage the application was lodged was in fact a draft. And I can't recall exactly when it was submitted, whether it was submitted after the planning inquiry that was held into the Bridging Island Plan. I think my memory tells me roughly that was in November. Get it right, John? 21.
Yeah.
I don't know when the date of the application was. And of course, there were 108 amendments in the states, of which quite a large number were adopted, both some by states debates and some by myself as the then minister, agreeing to incorporate that in the Island Plan. And therefore, the draft Bridging Island Plan did go through quite a significant process of revision after the debate, which took place in, I think it was March to begin of April, 2022. So I think that question of that planning statement is going to be pretty important. I'm a little bit concerned to hear that there isn't one, because I certainly found it very, very difficult to keep up with. I gave up being able to look at the up-to-date drawings. I probably looked at the older ones. just like other members of the public. So I think having some clarity of that before the inquiry would be good. I've only got one. I think there's one issue that does trouble me throughout. I think you've written at the end, you said education. And I think there were a number of issues that I think are very material, as you know, without going into detail, which weren't resolved conclusively in the Ireland Plan debate because there's a lot of contention at the time. And the issue about the generation of children from the housing being proposed, particularly if a decision is made by the states to switch the affordable housing policy. At the moment, the policies that the applicant is working to is a very small number of affordable homes, the remainder being open market. But of course, it is open for the states, and that was one of the amendments in the Ireland Plan that was adopted by the states to change that proportion. And it's not impossible, given the politics of how things are in Jersey, we might see a greater proportion of affordable homes, and therefore I think more likely to receive a generation of children. And I think there is definitely a gap, which I don't know how we're going to cover that, but you might take the view, well, it wasn't properly covered in the Ireland Plan, therefore it doesn't matter. That's up for you to say, sir. I certainly wouldn't agree with that. I think it's relevant to the issue of housing. Sorry, I think that was one open space. I think I'd certainly like to know also on the transport issues. I didn't hear there about who the planning authority were intended to rely on, because obviously for me the issue of transport and public links, pedestrian links, is crucial to that whole area. It's fundamental, and I'm a little bit concerned that we've got that ambiguity there. Obviously the applicant is very clear, they've got their consultant, so I think that's something for taking away. Anyway, I think that's all the clarification points I wanted to make. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that. Thank you.
Thanks. We will cover those subjects. Okay. Anybody else then?
Sorry, thank you. Natasha Day, Head of Strategic Housing and Regeneration. Just to pick up on Mr Young's point there about the quantum of affordable housing, I just wanted to raise that it has been secured for this period. So in the government plan 2024, the Waterfront is identified as providing 15% of affordable homes. So I just wanted to clarify that has been secured in respect of this planning application.
15%.
15%, a minimum of. Thank you.
Okay.
Could I just come back on 2 points just to provide clarifications? Yes, thank you. In terms of the planning statement, we had highlighted this as a concern, that the application was based on an outdated island plan, so that was relayed to the applicant. And in terms of transport, we have Rob Hayward and Ashraf Lacko, who will be representing infrastructure and environment, the transport team. So we do have representation for transport. Okay, let's draw it to a close there. Thank you very much for coming along. It's a useful session for us. Helen and I will get to work now in terms of trying to make some sense of all this and produce a programme. Leave it with us. It's not going to come out until the proofs are submitted, and we've got a bit of clarity on those. And I may well ask Helen to do a bit of liaison between the main parties in terms of how things may be progressing on the statements of common ground. But we will have a first stab at a programme in the coming weeks, and we'll publish that as a draft, and it will no doubt finesse and evolve a little bit from there. And hopefully we can make it all fit. At the moment it feels like a bit of a challenge. But thank you again for coming along, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.